In life, there are absolutes. There are things that cannot be undone or are finite. Things we know won't last forever. And one of them is, in fact, life itself, both for individuals and for species. The lives they lead are finite, and if the worst happens and an entire species dies out, it becomes extinct. And extinction is one of those absolutes because how can you come back once you've been declared extinct? Well, it turns out that life always finds a way. Here are 20 extinct animals being brought back to life. But before we get started, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Now, let's get started. Number 1. Ivorybuild Woodpecker. I started with a bird, and I'm going to end with a bird, and this time with the holy grail of birds, the famous Ivorybuild Woodpecker. Once, this proud bird lived in regions of the United States and Cuba. However, with the destruction of its habitat and hunting, it was nearly wiped out. It earned the nickname Holy Grail because spotting one in the wild would be like finding the true Grail, an extremely rare sight. This search has been going on for a long time, so long in fact that authorities are now considering declaring it extinct. In fact, the final verdict might come out in September. Undoubtedly, many birdwatchers and researchers will try to find it before then, and if they succeed, they will do everything to ensure it doesn't disappear forever. Number 2. Crested Gecko. It's true that some geckos can help you get great car and home insurance, among other things, but they also have to fight for their own survival. That was the case for the crested gecko. In the 1980s, it was believed to be extinct. However, in the 1990s, they were rediscovered and became extremely popular. Why? Because they became pets, in the best sense, and apparently loved to reproduce in captivity. As a result, their population soared. Nowadays, these jumping lizards are among the most popular pets in the world. If only all nearly extinct animals had such a simple solution to increase their population. Number 3. Pygmy Tarsier. This story has a twist, as you'll see. The Pygmy Tarsier was considered one of the smallest primates in the world, something unique when you think about it. They hadn't been seen alive since 1921, and it took a long time before they were found again. Because of this, they were considered extinct. But then a team found one, and here's the twist. They found it by accident, capturing and killing it unintentionally. Oops! Fortunately, they were able to capture others that were very much alive, and even placed trackers on them to follow their movements and, hopefully, find more in the future. Number 4. Lord Howe Island stick insect. If you didn't realize, I'm not talking about a plant, but an animal. More specifically, the Lord Howe Island stick insect. This was also an animal that lived in Australia, but then black rats became abundant and decimated its population. By the 1920s, it was declared extinct. Then, in the 1960s, some fresh remains were found, proving that they were still alive somewhere. And then, in 2001, a group of them was rediscovered in Australia. What's more, many of them were still capable of reproducing, and thus began the conservation and breeding efforts to recover the population. It won't be an easy task, but with time, it can be done. Number 5. Australian Bandicoot. The return of the Australian Bandicoot from extinction is, in fact, definitive proof that conservation and breeding programs work. Once upon a time, this creature lived freely in parts of Australia until cats, foxes, and farmers decimated its population, leaving only around 150 individuals. After that, conservationists stepped in to protect the animals, carrying out breeding and release programs. Over time, the plan really worked. Eventually, more than 1,500 Australian bandicoots were in conservation status, while others were living happily in the wild. Because of this, their conservation status was able to be changed. Now, this doesn't mean they're out of danger, far from it, but they've managed to improve, and that's already half the battle. Number 6. Woolly mammoth. You might think I'm joking about this one, but not exactly. Woolly mammoths were huge furry creatures that dominated the Ice Age and the Ice Age movies with Ray Romano and Queen Latifah. Many scientists agree that they went extinct when the climate started warming. However, over the years, there have been claims that they are still alive. But where are they, since no one has seen them? Well, in Siberia, of course. It's said that this frozen land is home to the last woolly mammoths in the world. And this makes sense in many ways. It's extremely cold there, and they could roam the land without being seen, except by someone very lucky. They would know how to find food and water in that tundra. In fact, some people claim to have filmed woolly mammoths in Siberia, but the footage isn't very clear, and many think it's a hoax. But considering everything I've shown so far, can we really dismiss these reports so quickly? Number 7. Pava. It was a bird first documented in 1877 with the unique characteristic of being black with white feathers. Mysteriously, it disappeared from sight. Several expeditions were made to try to find the bird, but none were successful, so it was considered extinct. However, in Peru, in 1977, the white-winged pava reappeared, and immediately people began working on its conservation to ensure it didn't disappear again. And yes, they really had a lot of work ahead of them. Although they found the white-winged pava, the number of individuals wasn't large. There were only about 250 of them. Still, they were no longer extinct after being considered so for a long time, and that's a very good thing. Number 8. Cuban Selenodon. Up until now, I've honestly shown you several creatures you'd probably be fine not knowing are still alive, aside from the interesting theme, of course. But now, let's talk about a living fossil that was rediscovered. And it's not exactly the friendliest creature out there. This animal is a venomous mammal that was once considered extinct but now seems to be back. It was believed that the species had disappeared because its habitat was destroyed by deforestation, along with the introduction of other species that helped eliminate it in various ways. But you said they're venomous, you shout. And yes, they are. They have venomous saliva that can be injected through their teeth to kill their prey. However, the Cuban Selenodon isn't very large, so animals like cats and dogs could easily kill it. It took a 10-year expedition to rediscover this species, but they ended up capturing a group of 7 individuals, and they even gathered evidence that there were more out there. Number 9. Javan Tiger. Now here's a bit of a more uplifting story about big cats, because we're going to talk about the Javan Tiger. What is the Javan Tiger? It was a large feline species that lived in Indonesia until just a few decades ago, when all signs of its existence seemingly disappeared, and as a result, it was declared extinct. But in 2017, a photo was taken in West Java showing what appeared to be a Javan tiger wandering around. How about that sudden reappearance at just the right time? Oh, but there's more. And it gets even better. The person who took the photo was a park ranger who knew all the species in the park. So when he saw the animal and didn't recognize it, he knew something was unusual. A colleague of his had also seen the large feline, but with stripes that were slightly different from those of the leopards that usually appeared there. Eventually, he managed to take a picture, and they suspect it might be a type of Javan leopard or another large cat, such as the Javan tiger itself. To be clear, this doesn't definitively prove that it's the tiger. Some say it came close, but not close enough. Only time will tell if it's true. And if nothing else, at least there's an unexpected visitor in the park that still needs to be identified. Number 10. Eastern Puma. Now let's go back to talking about big cats, because this time the focus is on the Eastern Puma, a feline with a rather intriguing history. And why is it difficult to talk about this species? Well, the reason is simple. According to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, this species is considered extinct. As a result, it was removed from the endangered species list. But here's the important detail. Even though it's officially declared extinct, there is no definitive proof that the Eastern Puma has disappeared forever. The situation is a true mystery, a kind of gray area. There's not enough evidence to prove its extinction, but there's also no concrete proof that it is still alive. Therefore, there remains doubt, uncertainty, and a small spark of hope for those who believe the Eastern Puma may someday reappear. The fact is that, for some time, this big cat was considered one of the most powerful and valuable animals in Canada. It was even the largest feline in the country at one point. Its presence in the Canadian ecosystem was of great importance, both because of its strength and its role in balancing the local fauna. The Eastern Puma was known to inhabit a specific area of Canada, with its habitat often associated with dense mountainous forests, which aided in its camouflage and hunting. However, over time, it began to disappear from these areas, and after a while, it was no longer seen. This caused growing concern, and the hope that it might still exist somewhere remote in Canada's vast landscape never faded. Despite no recent confirmation of the Eastern Puma's presence, many people continue to hold on to the hope that it will be found again. Throughout history, some species that were thought to be extinct, or at least extremely rare, have been rediscovered after decades or even millennia without signs. Examples like the coelacanth and the elephant shrew show that, in nature, there's always a chance that a lost species could reveal itself again. That's why, while authorities and scientists consider the eastern puma officially extinct, many still cling to the idea that it may somehow continue to live in remote and unknown areas. Perhaps, for some, this simple hope is enough. And who knows, one day, the eastern puma may surprise us once more. Number 11. New Guinea Singing Dog. As you might imagine, there are many types of conservation, and for some species, the best places to protect them are zoos and similar habitats, where they can be cared for more safely. However, the true essence of conservation lies in ensuring that animals can live freely in their natural habitats, and the New Guinea Singing Dog is a great example of how this can work. At first, it was believed that the New Guinea Singing Dog was extinct in the wild, with only around 300 individuals living in controlled environments like zoos and conservation centers. This was the situation that authorities and scientists had in mind until rumors began to surface that the distinctive howls of the dogs were being heard again outside of these places. Specifically, there were reports and even some photos showing these dogs in the Indonesian half of the large island north of Australia, which was a great relief and a surprise to everyone. It wasn't long before an expedition was organized to investigate this story further. On the first search, the team was able to collect fecal samples for DNA analysis, as well as take photos confirming the presence of the animal. The local inhabitants, familiar with the dogs, called them Highland dogs, which led to confusion in identifying the species, creating doubts among scientists. Initially, the samples collected weren't enough proof to confirm that they were the New Guinea Singing Dog. This meant that the search would need to continue. So the team returned to the site and this time managed to collect blood samples from the dogs found, which allowed for a comparison with the dogs already under protection in zoos. The comparison revealed that they were indeed New Guinea Singing Dogs, living in the wild, away from human care. This discovery was a huge victory for conservation, as it showed that even without direct protection, these creatures could still survive in the wild. This case reinforces the idea that, for many species, conservation in zoos and controlled habitats is not always enough to ensure long-term survival. If animals can survive and reproduce in the wild, it is a sign that there is hope for the species. And now, with this confirmation, the New Guinea Singing Dog has more than ever a real chance to thrive outside of zoos and live freely, as it always should. Number 12. South Island Takah. I've already shown that there are many birds that were thought to be extinct but are actually alive. Now it's time for the South Island Takah, a bird that was believed to be extinct for half a century. In 1948, they were rediscovered in the mountains and fjords of New Zealand, and suddenly, they weren't extinct anymore, alive. The discovery of this bird was a huge surprise for scientists, who had already given up on finding it. The species was considered extinct due to competition with invasive species such as rats, mustelids, and other animals, which were overwhelming this flightless bird that exclusively adapted to mountainous environments. Threatened by predators and habitat destruction, the Takah seemed to have no chance of survival. However, nature has its surprises, and this was an impressive example of resilience and luck. As soon as they were rediscovered, conservation efforts were immediately initiated to ensure that the population of this rare species remained alive and healthy. The Department of Conservation of New Zealand, in partnership with scientists and environmentalists, made sure the work was done properly. Since then, the Takah population has been carefully monitored and protected. Now, in addition to active conservation, a reintroduction program is underway. This means that, after decades of disappearance, the bird may return to areas where it had been considered extinct for a long time. The rapid population growth allows for reinforcement of wild groups, which is a very positive sign. After all, these wild individuals are essential, not only because they are genetically valuable, but also because they possess learned behaviors that help their survival in difficult and rugged habitats, such as the mountains of South Island. The birds released into the wild are equipped with transmitters, as are some of the resident birds. This allows for close monitoring of their survival and the progress made by the reintroduction programs. Monitoring is crucial to better understand the challenges the species faces and also to act quickly if new problems arise. We wish great success to the conservation efforts and hope they can keep invasive species far enough away for this bird to thrive and grow in numbers again. With some luck, the South Island Takah may become a symbol of recovery, demonstrating the power of nature and human dedication. Number 14. Painted frog of Hoola. The next species on the list is a bit more difficult to discuss because the painted frog of Hoola is, fortunately, still alive, as you might imagine. However, the reason it was nearly extinct is actually quite understandable, and what happened to it serves as an example of the unintended consequences of human actions. Let me explain. The painted frog of Hoola lived in a swamp, which, let's face it, is not very surprising considering we're talking about frogs. But in the 1950s, the Hoola Valley swamp, which gave the species its name, was not exactly the best place to live. The environment was conducive to the spread of malaria, an extremely dangerous disease that could cause serious health issues and, in many cases, even death. It was a huge risk to the local population, and malaria was something no one wanted to face at that time. To combat this, the authorities made a drastic decision. They drained the swamp area and redirected the water to the Jordan River in an attempt to eliminate malaria hotspots and make the area safer. However, as often happens when we try to tamper too much with nature, the consequences were not well planned. This intervention ended up causing a series of unforeseen problems. The reclaimed land turned out to be completely useless for farming. Toxins flooded the river, and the peat in the region frequently caught fire, creating a disastrous scenario. Naturally, this destruction of the ecosystem affected the entire local fauna and flora, and for many years, it was believed that the painted frog of Hoola was one of the great victims of this ecological catastrophe. The species disappeared from sight and no one heard from it again. Then, in 2011, something surprising happened. During a random search in the area, a female frog was found, and researchers quickly realized that it didn't look like any known species. After some studies and investigations, it was confirmed. That was a painted frog of Hoola, a species that was thought to have been extinct for a long time. It's a mystery how this frog managed to survive the destruction of its habitat, but a plausible theory is that in the 1990s, the region underwent a natural flooding that rehydrated the land. This flooding might have been enough to allow a few specimens of the species to stay alive and return to their old home, where they could find refuge. Since then, researchers have been closely monitoring the painted frog of Hoola population, but with the hope that it won't be driven out of its habitat again. With a little luck and the help of conservation efforts, who knows, the future of the painted frog of Hoola might be safer. Number 15. The Pinocchio Lizard. Admit it. You're curious to know what happens when the Pinocchio Lizard tells a lie, right? Don't worry, you're probably not the only one with that thought. And you're in luck. This lizard was recently rediscovered after disappearing from sight for about 50 years. Yes, this lizard was considered extinct for half a century before being found again in the forests of Ecuador. Impressive, right? A species that vanished for so long and then suddenly reappears almost like a ghost of nature. The Pinocchio lizard was first seen in the 1950s and soon received its curious name due to its long nose, which resembles a famous Disney character. The name, of course, refers to Pinocchio, the wooden puppet who wanted to become a real boy, and his nose, which grew whenever he lied. But what's even more remarkable is that after its initial discovery, the Pinocchio lizard simply vanished from public sight and no one saw it for decades. By the 1960s, it was declared extinct. Then, in 2005, something incredible happened. A woman in Ecuador witnessed the lizard crossing the road. Yes, you read that right. Something as simple as crossing the road proved that the species was still out there. It wasn't trying to avoid being seen by humans, but well, it just couldn't escape. Even with this proof of life, it still took quite a while for scientists to find it again. A team of researchers spent no less than 3 years searching for the Pinocchio lizard before they finally managed to photograph it. It was a long search, but in the end, perseverance paid off. Now, you're probably wondering, why does the Pinocchio lizard have such a curious nose? The answer is even more fascinating. Only the males of this species have this characteristic nose, and the females don't. Why does this happen? Well, scientists believe that the male's nose is used to attract females during the mating process, functioning as a type of sexual display, similar to the behavior of some other animals. In any case, nature always has a surprising way of creating unique features in its creatures, and the Pinocchio lizard is proof of that. Number 16. Rare black leopard. It may seem surprising that one of the world's big cats came so close to extinction, but when we look at the reality of big cats, this is not so uncommon. Deforestation, illegal hunting, and habitat degradation are just a few of the factors that put many big cat species at serious risk of disappearing. And the black leopard is one of the best examples of this sad reality. For years, there were rumors about the presence of this rare feline in the forests of Kenya, but there was no conclusive evidence of its existence. Then, a group of conservationists decided to take action. They went to the region where the black leopard had been spotted and set up monitoring cameras. What followed was a long wait, with months of observation without any sign of the feline, until, finally, one of the image hunters had a surprise. A black leopard appeared before the camera, exactly as the conservationists had hoped. Black leopards, also known as black panthers due to their completely black fur, are incredibly rare. In fact, those responsible for capturing the images and publishing the scientific paper on the sighting noted that the last record confirming their existence had been made in 1909. In other words, an impressive 110 years passed before a black leopard was documented again. This long pause between records was an alarming sign of how these felines were on the verge of disappearing. The feature that makes black leopards so special is melanism, a rare genetic condition that results in an overproduction of pigment, turning their fur completely black. It's the opposite of albinism, where pigment production is extremely low, making the animal's skin white. This genetic mutation is so fascinating that it's impossible not to admire the beauty and uniqueness of these felines. It's truly amazing to know that such extraordinary creatures can still be found in the modern world. And as a society, we must do everything we can to ensure that more animals like the black leopard continue to exist on our planet. If we manage to preserve this rare species, we'll not only be leaving a legacy for future generations, but also playing an important role in maintaining biodiversity. And if one day the people of Wakanda could look back and see that we managed to preserve such a feline, we can be sure they would be immensely proud of our dedication to nature. Number 17. The kangaroo rat. You're probably already familiar with this species, especially if you've watched our previous videos. Kangaroo rats, despite the name, are not relatives of kangaroos, although they do share some similarities, mainly in their hind legs. These legs have impressive elasticity, allowing the kangaroo rat to leap great distances and deliver powerful kicks. By the way, you might have already seen that famous video of a kangaroo rat defending itself from a snake, landing a precise kick to its head. If you haven't, look it up. It's amazing. But the reason I'm mentioning the kangaroo rat is that, although it's relatively well known today, it was believed to be extinct until 2017. Before that, the animal hadn't been seen for over 30 years, which was a long time without any sign of its existence. This led many scientists and naturalists to conclude that the species had disappeared forever. Now, you probably already have an idea of the main factor that pushed the kangaroo rats away, right? That's right, humans. The area where the kangaroo rats lived, mainly in the Australian desert, was invaded by farmers who altered the landscape, destroying their natural habitat. These factors forced the rats to disappear from the areas where they were once abundant. However, nature has its surprises. In recent decades, climate change and severe droughts affected the crops and agricultural ecosystems in the region, forcing farmers to abandon land. With the reduction of human activity in the area, the kangaroo rats began to slowly return to their original habitats. This reintroduction, as hopeful as it is, has raised concerns among some people, as many fear that if conditions aren't right, the rats could be driven out again. That's why efforts are being made to create a protected area and ensure the continuity of this unique species. We're also hoping these efforts come to fruition because, let's face it, the kangaroo rat is one of the most fascinating and cool animals we've ever encountered. It would be a true loss to the world if it disappeared again. Number 18. Bermuda Petrol. As you've probably noticed, it's not enough to simply rediscover species that were once thought to be extinct. The real challenge is finding these species and, even more importantly, protecting them so they don't disappear for good. The Bermuda Petrol is a perfect example of how the rediscovery of a species can be dramatic, but also full of hope. For a long time, it was believed that this bird had vanished from the face of the earth, until, in a moment of surprise, scientists discovered that it still existed. This reappearance was so unexpected that the Bermuda Petrol was nicknamed the Lazarus species, in reference to the biblical story of a being who rose from the dead. Imagine the scene. When scientists found the petrel, they were stunned, as if they had witnessed a miracle of nature. But who were these birds that caused such surprise? The Bermuda Petrel was, or is, a seabird that exclusively inhabited the islands of the Bermuda archipelago. These islands, however, have undergone major changes over the centuries, mainly with the arrival of humans. As you can imagine, the impact was devastating for the bird population. In the 1500s, passing Spanish sailors, along with rats and pigs they brought with them, fed on the birds and their eggs during their stops on the islands. This introduction of invasive animals was a fatal blow to many native species, including the Bermuda Petrol. By the 1600s, just 2 decades after the British arrived in Bermuda, the bird was declared extinct. Imagine how quickly a species disappeared. In just 20 years, a population once estimated at over 1 million birds was wiped out, and the petrel was considered lost forever. Then, in 1951, something incredible happened. Decades after the species was thought to be extinct, a teenager, yes, a simple teenager, made a discovery that would change everything. He found about 17 petrel nests hidden on the islands. This moment, more than just a discovery, was a turning point in the history of the bird's conservation. This young man became the first advocate for the species and spent most of his life dedicated to protecting and recovering the petrel population. He devoted decades of tireless work, caring for the birds and ensuring their population began to grow again. And perhaps most importantly, he did this with unwavering passion, without seeking recognition. This man, whose actions went unnoticed by many, was crucial in the Bermuda Petrel being rediscovered and preserved. Today, we can thank this special man, whose decades of dedication helped ensure the bird had a chance to survive. Number 19. The elephant shrew. Once again, nature surprises us with an unexpected return. We're talking about the elephant shrew, a creature many believe to be extinct due to its absence from sight for decades. In fact, this small and curious animal hadn't been seen in its natural habitat since the distant 1970s. Fast forward nearly half a century to 2020, and here it is again, to the astonishment and joy of scientists, environmentalists, and all those passionate about the unknown fauna. During a scientific expedition in the Horn of Africa, researchers were fortunate enough to find live specimens, active and in excellent health. The discovery not only confirmed that the species still existed, but also fully justified the effort put into that mission. Meeting this animal again was like encountering a ghost of nature that had come back to life. And if the name confuses you, you're not alone. Despite being called an elephant shrew, it's neither a shrew nor an elephant. In fact, it's a distant relative of animals like the manatee, the true elephant, and the aardvark. Still, the name stuck due to its curious appearance, with a long, flexible snout that resembles a miniature trunk, similar to that of a tiny elephant. Visually, it's an animal that captivates at first sight. The research team was ecstatic to find an elephant shrew inside one of their secure traps. When they opened the capture structure, they came face to face with the small creature, and excitement was immediate. Initially, they didn't know exactly what species they were dealing with, but upon careful examination, they noticed very specific features. Among them, a striking detail: the small tail with a tuft at the end, a distinctive characteristic. It was at that moment that the scientists looked at each other, realizing they were facing something truly extraordinary. They had rediscovered an animal the world had nearly written off as lost. Interestingly, the expedition only happened because locals reported recently seeing the elephant shrew. One of the people involved in the search even claimed to have seen the animal before, and was absolutely right. These local reports, often overlooked, were crucial in directing the researchers' efforts. Thanks to this collaboration between science and local knowledge, we now have the chance to better study the species, protect its natural habitat, and perhaps ensure its survival for future generations. Number 20. The Australian night parrot. When we talk about extinction, we usually think of something final, an irreversible end with no way back. However, the natural world is full of surprises, and some species show us that extinction can sometimes be only apparent. There's a curious phenomenon in which a species is considered extinct, even though it's still alive. But how is that possible? It's not about error or negligence, but rather a real challenge. The planet is vast, filled with remote and unexplored areas. We can't examine every corner of the Earth at once, so it's entirely possible for a species to simply vanish from our sight for decades, without actually vanishing from nature. That was the case with the Australian night parrot, a bird shrouded in mystery and silence for a very long time. For over 65 years, there were no reliable records of its existence. Naturally, scientists concluded the species had disappeared forever. But against all odds, a small group was located in a remote, protected area. And when we say small, we mean it. Fewer than 100 individuals were found. The exact location was kept secret to prevent any human disturbance that could put these birds at even greater risk. The rediscovery caused a stir among environmentalists and biologists, reigniting hope that nature still holds incredible secrets. Following this astonishing discovery, the organization Bush Heritage was called upon to take on a key role in the species' conservation. They established the Pullen Pullen Reserve, a vast area of around 56,000 hectares dedicated solely to the protection of these parrots. This initiative isn't just about preventing another extinction. It's about creating a safe environment where the population can recover, grow, and thrive over time. The work includes strict monitoring, predator control, habitat protection, and encouraging natural breeding. It's an admirable effort, showing how science, dedication, and hope can work hand in hand. Now, everything depends on the continuation of this work and our ability to protect what remains. If all goes well, the Australian night parrot may no longer be a ghost of the past and might one day fly freely again across the skies of Australia. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed our content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't forget to check out other interesting content appearing on your screen right now, and I'll see you in the next video. See you next time.